eminent speaker, Dr. Nirja A. Gupta, ethical issues and green art efforts Oak Brook in 2019, and my esteemed and most popular teacher, as well as poet, singer of folk music, and a good auditor, winning Teacher Award Shiksha Ratna from the Government of West Bengal in 2017. The topic of today's webinar is reading literature, critiquing literary art. Definitely a very important topic that technical and how to study and analyze literary art properly. From core of my heart, I believe that this webinar discussion must enchanted all the participants. I am expecting all success of today's webinar. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful special lecture. Before introducing our first speaker, Dr. Nirja Arun Gupta, I, Arnab Mondal, Assistant Professor, Department of English, on behalf of the entire department, Krishnagar Government College, want to apologize to the participants for the fact that our distinguished speaker's academic and administrative profile is so illustrious that we perhaps will not be able to do justice to it for time constraints. However, without some of our achievements, Dr. Gupta currently holds the post of the principal at Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan's RA College of Arts and Commerce, Ahmedabad. She also serves as the director of the Institute of Indic Studies, Study Abroad Program and Diaspora Research Center, Gujarat University. She is the chief coordinator of the Bharat Shodh Sansthan, Ahmedabad, and a member of the NAC peer team. She has more than 3 decades of valuable teaching and research experiences. She has 16 books, more than 5 research articles to her credit. Professor Gupta, who has traveled extensively both in India and abroad, is at present on panel of several international and Indian universities, commissions, academic and administrative bodies. She has also delivered talks on Akashvani, Doordarshan and other popular TV channels and participated as expert and or panelist. She is the recipient of a number of prestigious awards such as the Shiksha Bharati Puraskar in 2011, Atal Bihari Vajpayee National Award 2017 for contribution in diaspora studies, GOPIO Award for International Save the Planet Campaign Paris 2017, etc. Her areas of interest include English literature, Indian poetics, Indology, ancient Hindu culture, diaspora and migration studies, Gandhian thought, contemporary literature in Indian languages, fourth world literature, cultural nationalism, Hindi literature, and Gujarati literature. Sam, on behalf of the Department of English, I cordially welcome you and request you to deliver your lecture.
I co-panelists, and dear faculties and dear students. It's a matter of pleasure to present myself on this platform and to join all of you. Uh, it's a humble honor for me also. So thank you so much from Gujarat to West Bengal to be a part of this honorable webinar. The topic I have selected today is the fundamentals of criticism. I know I had a very choice to select the topic, and even then I have selected a very dry topic that what are the fundamentals of criticism, what are the functions of criticism, who can be a good critic, what are the essential characteristics. Look and very basic when we talk about them in relation to literature. I'm not talking of English literature only. We all know how important they are. English and creative writing assist so anything which is would survive for a little, months or maybe couple of, which means that there is a survival of a period. For for example, romantic texts, the Victorian literature, like that. There is a third category, which means the books are, or the writings are, or the creations are universal. They win over the time length. So they don't belong to one time, yet one place or one person. They extend themselves to many other cultures. That this literature is the transient literature, this literature is the periodic literature, this literature universal Jai, we say, over time. And if someone is deciding apply them into our day-to-day behavior. If we do that, then only we would become a very good art critic. When we say art critic, that means we have the ability to judge the quality of creation. Why should we judge the quality of creation? Each creator, whether he is an author, she is an artist, one is a painter, or someone is singer, why should we categorize them? They all are doing their best. Why should we get involved? Who are we to judge it? Who are we to put criticism into the categories? Why should we do it? Because we want to go ahead for better creation. We want to lay down certain norms. If adopted, that would automatically result into better creation. So these are the basic rules why we should study this paper, as what are the fundamentals of very simple language only. I don't think my camera is on. I don't know if I can share my slide. Let me just try if I can do it. Otherwise, I'll try to be simpler, even simpler than that. So let me just see if I can share it, and please tell me if you can see my slide. Is it visible, my slide?
Yes, ma'am.
No, no. See, I am using that only. My camera is not on. So that means I won't be able to show the order to the vocal math. That's what with criticism, the art of estimating the qualities and character any artist and means standards of judging. We have to the art of judgment evaluation with the prior knowledge it brings the have a prior experience. We don't know what is here. So prior knowledge, that is a critic, should be well exposed, well knowledgeable, as much we need the critic would have, it would be more and more in values of analysis, and there should be investigation. When we do an investigation, it is more has followed certain norms and Chaucer has not followed the dogma, the critical dogma, and then we start criticizing the literature in these terms. We all know that Spencer was preoccupied writing, while Chaucer absorbed whatever was there and his imagination was working, resulting into inventing, a very different type of storytelling method. So this could be preconceived laid down rules, and we don't judge the writing on that basis. The 16th to 18th century of writings, mainly English poets, they were not perplexed with the preconceived beliefs, and that is how the literature has progressed. If we had to believe only on the principles of criticism, then even the critics cannot grow, even the varieties can't grow. If the artist is not experimenting, if the artist is not rejecting the preconceived notions, if the artist is not bringing in innovation, then criticism would have been static. Criticism would not have gone into so many brands and categories and genre, etc. So we have to understand that criticism resulted into mass of very inferior creative writings during 16th to 18th century. And Paradise Lost was the only example that we can find during that period that actually came up or lived up before that. Edgar Allan Poe had the courage to say that short poems might have virtues of considerable importance. But we know Aristotle has rejected this type of creation. If we would have stuck to Aristotle and only to epics, then maybe the short poems would never have seen the light of the day. Therefore, we have to judge as a critic whether this is an experiment, whether there is an establishment of a new genre, whether it is creating certain new notions in the field of literature. So even that is a function of criticism. We all know that novel writing is most of the time freer than the poesy. The creative writer who writes a novel is basically more independent than the poet. And any form of formal criticism, we know it is younger because in the West, the novel writing came very late. So Aristotle could not impact the novel writing. But even then, there are norms. So when we study the novels like Robinson Crusoe, Clarissa Harlow, Tom Jones, Tristram Shandy, Waverley, Emma, Pickwick Papers, Wuthering Heights, and so on and so forth. If suppose the critics come first, that these novels do not have taken the shape only. So in criticism, we have to give enough space, enough licenses, enough liberties, or what we say the poetic licenses to the authors. We cannot just judge a text on the preconceived notion for one reason, that they are the late functions. If we come to modern days, the function of criticism has become to interpret less appreciative readers and evaluate a literary composition, indicating what an author has set himself to. So it's no more the society which is more important, but the individual who is important. So the function of a critic has become all the more difficult. Because if had it been like the societal procedure, for example, Victorian text or Romantic era, so whole society is in a pattern. But when we come down to the individualistic writing, the job of a critic is all the more complex, because then one has to study the context of the individual, the environment of the individual, the reasons behind of an individual. And to study an individual, one has to be multi-layered himself. If a critic is not himself exposed to all those layers of experiences, it might do injustice to the author. So they have to look upon themselves in the same manner as the author is presenting himself or herself. The defenders of certain literary laws which govern poetry, drama, which resound as authoritative in their laws, this have to be dropped because only Europe was actually engrossed with this type of authoritative language. Unfortunately, we even today follow the same pattern as Europe has set to become a critic. We have not evolved with the different liberties, how we should approach the text. So in the functions of criticism, a critic has to allow, even one should forget that can we punish those who are breaking the laws, has to allow creation of new laws. The function is to interpret and a wayward work, whether it is a genius or not. Because it's very difficult for a general reader, an ordinary reader, in the present complexity to understand and appreciate. So here, the critic becomes a step above than a common reader. A reader might be reading for pleasure, a reader might be reading for knowledge, a reader might be reading for appreciation, but a critic has to function as a reader and as an evaluator of an individual both. So what do we come ahead? We come ahead with the concept of training. Anyone cannot become a good critic. To be a good critic, just like a cricketer, one has to practice. One has to get open up or exposed to different types of, maybe say, bowling, because these texts are like the bowling from the fast and slow and spin bowlers, and we have to reach out to the originating point of that particular ball and then to estimate what will be the finishing move of this text. If we train ourselves with all sorts of possibilities, open ourselves to all sorts of possibilities, then only we can reach to the harmonious state of criticism. Otherwise, we would just become like an agitated critic. An agitated critic is never happy. An agitated critic is always there to look upon down. It never boosts up the good qualities of an author. So we need to understand whether we want to end up like an agitated heart, or we have to create an atmosphere which would lead to the further growth. So a trained critic would explain the complexity and the value of those elements which are now composed inside it. So when we say, when we look back and see Ancient Mariner. Now, Ancient Mariner looks like a perfect poem because of the harmonious presentation of different elements which constitute the poem. But when we say Paradise Lost, it looks a great poem. So both poems are good, but are we valuing the harmony or are we valuing the greatness? That all depends upon the experience and the training of that particular person who is having it. This is how we need to work actually when we say that what is the basic function of criticism. It's a very difficult task. A critic has to perform a very, very difficult task because it might happen that the author is already a renowned author and this writing is not so good. So what do we do with the writings then? Do we have a courage to evaluate that writer? Do we have the right, harmonious state of our mind? Can we have a balanced outlook, or do out of fear or maybe the pressure or maybe the lobbies that work in the publishing world, do we give some opinion which is not good? This is how we should study the paper of criticism, because it's a very practical topic. Anything is open to us and we are given the liability as a critic to judge it properly. Our one wrong judgment would create wrong, maybe wrong pathology into that genre. So can we risk to become that? So some serious blunders might be committed, or they have been created in past by great critics. When it comes face to face, we have seen like Crabbe, he considered Coleridge's Ancient Mariner as merely an interesting attempt to portray madness. Now, when we read ourselves, it looks a masterpiece. Why should Crabbe call it just an attempt to portray madness? And then he quotes, he says, as if a painter is given a picture of lunacy and it would make his canvas crazy and fill it with wild, unconnected limbs. So there are mistakes, there are follies which we can find from very renowned critics. There are some other older critics who actually consider T.S. Eliot's This Wasteland as preposterous because they could not appreciate the teen age or the new age what Eliot was trying to portray. So to perform the functions of analysis and interpretation successfully, a critic should avoid prejudice and dogmatism. When we say prejudice, that is the same thing. Like prejudice can be into both the directions. Either we are heavily loaded with the lobby and we say, okay, that author is great. He would definitely write something great only. So we have preconceived notion. Or this is a new author. A new author cannot write anything which is great. So we have to give a mediocre evaluation or maybe low graded evaluation because a new person cannot write something which is brilliant. So these type of prejudices are very, very harmful when we analyze text. Similarly, dogmatism. If we sit with the set of principles and try to fit in the text into this, it would be something like as if for a film song, the tune is already been decided and now you try to write lyrics into it. So many a times the lyrics come out are just the jargons or maybe just the mismatched words which hardly mean anything, which won't be as pragmatic as if the poet is given a chance to just write down the thoughts itself. So dogmatism is also to be avoided. We cannot sit down with the laid principles. Yes, we need training, so my mind is trained, but when I put into application, it doesn't mean that every time I need to apply those principles. Do I find a new writing? Do I find a new genre? Do I find a new way of appreciating the text? Then of course one should be confident enough to put that on. Now, the older critics, they generally show that the former tendency, that is prejudice and dogmatism, is, prejudice is very good. And the younger critics, they show a tendency to denigrate the authors who are given an exalted position by older critics. Now, the older generation always is skeptical that no, new person cannot write good. And the new generation is always skeptical that, okay, you have established someone good, but how do we trust that that is good? So there is a constant, what we say, conflict sort of a situation between the old and new generation, but a balanced critic would actually behave in certain manner that it won't be heavily loaded with the older and younger precepts. Sainsbury, we know, he pronounced Shelley as a quintessential poet. And he hated Shelley's political and religious sentiments. Whereas T.S. Eliot, who is a younger critic, he says that, none can appreciate Shelley who has outgrown adolescence and that he turned Shelley only to check a reference. So there are different views about the same writer. We cannot be carried away with those established rules. In order to perform the function adequately, an older critic, it gives a new literary work a careful thought. And if it makes a strong appeal, is large-hearted enough to appreciate it. The other way around, it should not be unnecessarily turned into those works who establish after careful thought of older critic. The criticism, the critics are just like the satellites which move around the planets, and they can illuminate, they can transfigure, they can even distort, but both the author or the creator and the critic, they light from the sun of beauty and truth. So beauty and truth should be judged by a critic. The last portion of my talk, I'll come quickly, is the qualities of a good critic. If I want to become an appreciator, I want to become a critic, I want to adopt a profession of an art critic. In our newspapers, in our journals, in our magazines, there are people who write about the quality of a movie, quality of a book, quality of a painting or a dance performance. They are all called art critics. If I want to become an art critic, so what should be the qualities of a good critic? Let us list them one by one. And I'm going to share this PPT with Dr. Pulakesh Ghosh. He can just mail them thereafter because I'm unable to show. So many of our students might be deprived of the material. Please don't worry. I'm going to share it later and you will all get these slides. The qualities of good critic. Now, it must be a person who has very wide and varied experience in reading. Reading, when it comes to reading, it means also thinking, churning, chewing, everything. So a good critic should have been exposed to the good writers. A good critic must read quite a number of inferior authors also. We should not concentrate only on the good writings or very established writers and writings. We need to understand what is not so good about certain texts, which would teach us or train us into what to reject. Then a good critic must have reflected on his writings and formed the habit of analyzing the reading in his own mind. Can we analyze while we are reading? Can we appreciate or can we reject or can we just react onto that? That makes us a good critic. A good critic should not merely be able to criticize the work of others, but of his own self. How far I'm doing justice, how far I'm able to take up this job. Is this genre beyond my capabilities, beyond my forte? If that is so, what should I do to come to this level? We should not leave it. I'm not asking if it is beyond the forte, just leave that part. We have to be sincere enough to judge ourselves and then upgrade ourselves. A good critic should have very superior sensibility. It is above the level of a reader. A reader goes to a text just to please the soul or enjoy himself or herself. But a good critic has a larger responsibility because it directs others what level of art is that. So a good critic must have a greater capacity of receiving impressions and sensations from the work of art. A good critic must also be able to see what the author sees, whether it's a poet or an author or a narrator, what the poet says, what the poet hears, what the poet feels or experiences. A good critic has to reach first to that point and thereafter would enlarge with his own experiences to the better horizons. A good critic can plan many roles. It might be an interpreter or the censor. It can be elucidator. It can explain ideas which are obscure or even those ideas which the author has taken it for granted. So it goes further. A good critic must have a psychological gift which is both natural and trained. If someone is psychologically sensitive, then they can actually discover the mind of the author behind the book, because that is very important. Whether we read it in the contextual setting or we don't relate to the contextual setting, but the mind of author is definitely embedded into the writing. And a good critic must have the teaching or communicating capacity. To feel something is very good, but what we have felt, the same quality is needed to communicate as well what we have felt. So a good critic must have a very good area of communicating abilities. Well, he must or she must have a philosophical mind. You need to reach to that philosophies, then only the genre are created. A good critic must have quality of creative imagination. Just like a blacksmith cannot be a critic of poetry, because if you can't create yourself, you cannot reach out to that level. So that creative imagination must be a forte of a critic, and which must be shared with the creative artist. A good critic must also have wide erudition. This would increase the understanding. His mind would be stored with impressions, which would be modified and refreshed, and each successive impression he receives, it would be for contemplation. So you can build up the whole system of impressions, which would enable to create the generalized statements and universalizing or generalizing the power of critics. A good critic should not be over emotional, must be most of the time objective, must try to discipline the personal biases, prejudices, whims, and must have highly trained sensibility, which must have sense of structural principles, and must not be satisfied with emotional impressions. You should not be carried away with the emotions. The critics who supply only vague or emotional expressions, or maybe the opinions or fancy, they actually corrupt the taste of their own age. Uh, to sum up, the ideal critic must have highly developed sense of fact. A sense of fact, what we don't say the biographical or sociological knowledge, but the technical knowledge. So technically also a critic has to be very, very sound. It's just like the lemon squeezer. You squeeze the lemon, what you get is the juice. So a critic must know how to squeeze the lemon to get into the juice, and then can we define the juice. The comparison and analysis are the chief tools of a critic, and the so perfect critic must be an expert in analysis and comparison. It must be used very skillfully and subtly, very, very, slightly, not very, in a very loud or boisterous manner. And he must know what to compare, how to compare, what to analyze, how to analyze. He must compare the writers of the present with the past, obviously, but only as experience, not as individuals. We are not letting down someone. We are simply getting the creation. So must be able to pass judgment in a very, very objective manner, just to progress with the qualities. If you don't progress with the qualities, then it would mean that the critic has not done the proper job. So with this, I come to the end that I chose the functions of criticism, the fundamentals of criticism. I dealt with three primary areas. The first is what is literary criticism. The second is what are the basic functions of criticism. And the third is what are the qualities of a good critic. Once again, I thank very much to Dr. Pulakesh Ghosh and to the entire team of organizers, to Dr. Niyogi Shobhan and everyone. Thank you so much for making me the part of this webinar.
Thank you, ma'am, for your lucid yet extremely insightful lecture, which has aptly pointed out the organic links between literature, criticism, and life, and how the idea of criticism has evolved across time and the required qualities, role, and responsibility of a critique. I hope the participants, especially the students, will be able to link this lecture with the ideas of criticism developed by John Keats, Matthew Arnold, T.S. Eliot, and etc., and approach a text without prejudices and from different perspectives. Thank you. Now, I would like to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Shishir Kumar Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee currently works as an associate professor in the postgraduate department of English at Hooghly Mohsin College, West Bengal. In his more than 3 decades-long teaching career, he has served a number of government colleges in West Bengal, including Krishnagar Government College. His monograph entitled Philip Larkin Poetry That Builds Bridges has earned him international recognition as a major Larkin scholar with significant mention in the Wikipedia. His first novel, The Fire Salmon, was published in 2010. More than 20 of his research papers have been published in books, including those brought out by Orient Black Swan and Cambridge Scholars Publishing House, UK, and in reputed national and international journals. He received an Outstanding Teacher Award, Shiksha Ratna, from the Government of West Bengal in 2017. His edited volume entitled The World of Aga Shahid Ali is going to be published by the State University of New York Press, USA within a few months. A recipient of the award of the second winner in the Write India Season 3 story writing contest organized by the Times of India Group, Dr. Chatterjee's areas of interest include Indian English fiction and British English poetry. So, sir, on behalf of the Department of English, I cordially welcome you and request you to deliver your address, your lecture. I think there is certain problem.
Hello, can you hear me now? Hello,
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yes, sir.
can you hear me now? Okay, okay. And can you see me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hello? Okay,
Yes, sir.
okay, okay. Thank you very much for giving me the assurance
Yes,
that
sir.
you were that you can both hear me and you can also listen to me. It's all right. It's all right. Okay, so let me start talking. First, I would like to express my gratitude to the entire English department of Krishnagar Government College, particularly my former student, Professor Pulokesh Ghosh, for inviting me to this one-day national level webinar. I must also express my gratitude to Dr. Shobhun Niyogi, the officer in charge of Krishnagar Government College, and Dr. Amoresh Mondol, with whom I had worked for so many years at Hooghly Mohsin College during my stay there in the first term, and who is at present posted at Krishnagar Government College and is the IQAC coordinator of that college. Now, I was not fortunate enough to have the time to listen to the entire lecture of Professor Dr. Nirja Gupta. I just got to hear the last part of her lecture, and what I guessed from that is that she deliberated on an area which is related to the higher level of intellection, or I should say, that is my word, mental-lection. She wanted to define what should be the role of a critic and what a critic should do and should not do. Now, my lecture is of a more humdrum kind. It is not related to any higher thing, and perhaps everybody in the government colleges or all the colleges of West Bengal knows that whenever I speak, I do not speak for the scholars because I do not have that competence. I speak only for my students, for all the students who have been studying English literature or who have been planning to study English literature in their undergraduate level and also in their postgraduate level. Now, let me first try to spare a few words on the title of this webinar. The title is, so far as I remember, it's Reading Literature, Critiquing Literary Art. Now, reading literature, well, how would you explain it? Literature is a subject which is read almost by everybody, beginning from those who drive auto rickshaws or toto rickshaws or cycle rickshaws, up to the highest level of physicists and chemists and mathematicians. I had many friends, I still have many friends whose discipline is physics or mathematics or chemistry, and they are better read in literary texts than I am. So I don't think this is the meaning that the organizers of this webinar had intended. They must have meant what is reading literature for the students who have opted for English honors. Perhaps they mean reading English literature. Okay, even if it is any literature written in a vernacular language, say in Bengali or in Tamil or in Telugu or in Hindi or in Oriya, what are the uh, requirements? I mean, what are the qualities that someone who intends to read literature seriously, I mean, not just for getting pleasure out of it, not just for having some fun, but for, imbibing certain values which literature always strives uh, to impart to us directly or indirectly. Even for them, the primary prerequisite for reading literature is sensibility. And it is not the kind of sensibility of all the people. It is the kind of sensibility which Dr. Nirja Gupta rightly termed a trained sensibility. A kind of sensibility which will enable you to respond to the common situations, to the daily life situations, to pick up poetry from here and there, to pick up a line and to be awed and to be struck with wonder, to enjoy it, to relish it, even though it is never written. I will give you just one example. Think of Bengali literature, okay? You don't have to go to literature right at the start. Let us start with a daily life kind of situation. Once, when I was a college student, myself and my nephew, we used to live at Shiuri. It is the district headquarters of Birbhum. And from there, whenever we had 2 or 3 days leave, short leave, we used to visit the houses of our friends who used to live in some villages. So once we were invited to go to a house, to go to a village called Nishchintipur. It was in the district of Murshidabad. We got down from the bus, and then because we were not given any direction as to which way to proceed to reach that village, and we found that there was a problem. That is, there were 3 branches of a single road, mud road, and we could not decide which road to take. Anyway, we started walking, and after walking for a few minutes, we saw a man was coming from the other direction. He had his kind of lungi or dhoti raised up above his knees, and he had a kind of his agricultural implement on his shoulder, and he was bare-bodied. So we were moving towards him, and he was moving towards us. And then we met at a point, and then we asked him just one simple question. Dada, we want to go to Nishchintipur. Is this the right path that we have taken? And the man said, yes, you have taken the right path. And then we asked, well, shall we go? Do we have to take any other path after a certain point of time? And he said, no. And then he said something in Bengali, which I found extremely profoundly poetic and philosophical. He said, সোজা চলে যান, পথই আপনাকে টেনে নিয়ে যাবে. I repeat, he said, সোজা চলে যান, পথই আপনাকে টেনে নিয়ে যাবে. Now, if this is not poetic, if this is not philosophical, if this is not packed with literary nuances, what is literature? I will give you another example from a film by Satyajit Ray. It was a short film. The title of that film is Piku. Achha, can you hear me? Hello? Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So Piku is a little boy. his father is fabulously rich. His mother is a housewife. His father goes to his factory office during the daytime, and during noon, some other gentleman comes to see Piku's mother, and they spend some time together. And meanwhile, what Piku does is he wanders about throughout the garden, touching this leaf of that tree, seeing the fish dart in the pool from this side to that, and he watches the servants and the maid servants doing their works. So one day, Piku, while wandering, Piku was, he stopped before an old servant of the house, and he was having his lunch. He was, making some big dose of rice and with vegetable curry mixed with it, and then he was swallowing them one by one, and after each swallow, he was chewing a green chili, and at the same time he was making a sound like it was like it was very pungent, that green chili. Piku watched the man for a long time without disturbing the man. particular poem has on us, or a particular short story has on us. But unfortunately, we have to speak in English in the classroom. And our students find it difficult to communicate with us. And we find it difficult to communicate with them if we use a technical term, which the students are coming across for the first time in their life. So there is a clash of interests, clash of entry levels. Okay, I will come to that. I mean, how to solve that problem. The next part of the title of this webinar is Critiquing Literary Art. Now, by literary art, what is meant is that there are certain devices, certain methods, certain rhetorical features, certain, subtle means and manipulations of language, which the writers, the poets, the short story writers, the novelists, the playwrights employ in order to evoke certain kind of emotions or feelings in the minds of the readers, in this case, students. So that is literary art. And see, literature, therefore, the implication of this part of the title is that, like other art forms, is another art form. Literature is an art form. And when you see an idol and an animation, and Krishnagar is famous for Jagadhatri. That's why I gave this example. So when you look at the image of Jagadhatri, you are actually looking at a piece of art, a work of art. When you are looking at a painting, you are looking at a piece of art. Similarly, when you are reading a poem, you are actually reading, you are actually exposing yourself to a specimen of literary art. And there is a word before the literary, critiquing. What does it mean? To critique means to appreciate, to account for the factors which are responsible for evoking certain emotions or feelings or thoughts or ideas in our minds. Critiquing also means saying that a particular turn of phrase has not worked properly, that it could have been replaced by any other phrase. Critiquing, therefore, means judging, analyzing, interpreting the art of. Now you can understand what I'm driving at. What I'm driving at is that in order to be able to critique literary art, to appreciate literary art, to understand it, to analyze it, to interpret it, what you need, as I told you in the very first place, is sensibility. That is all right. Now, sensibility is something which most of our students have. If I tell them a line from a Bengali poem, they will be thrilled. They will have, a sense of wonder. Let me quote just two lines from a poem by Shankha Ghosh. I don't remember the title of that poem. It's a rhyme, actually. Amoresh might be able to remember it for me. Shoru hoye jan dada. The situation is that inside a minibus, before the lockdown, right? it's very congested and you find it very difficult to come out of it. And if you want to come out of it,
I think there is certain technical problems. Do bear with us. We'll be Yes, you are audible. I think so. We have nearly 50 participants, so we can resume.
Hello. Hello, is he? Hello. Yes, I have informed Dr. Yeah. You're audible. And can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
I have informed Dr. Chatterjee, I mean our distinguished speaker, and he is trying to join again. Yeah. Just wait.
Yes. Allow me to join the meeting.
Yes, sir.
Have you, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Up to which point did you hear me? Could you please remind me? Okay. Let me begin in this way. So I was explaining critiquing literary art. That
Point
is,
did you hear me? Could you please remind me?
okay. Let me begin in this way. So I was explaining. Uh, the art of critiquing literary art, and I was telling you that whenever you are looking at a painting, you are looking at an art form. When you are hello,
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
acha. So when you were looking at a painting, you were looking at an art form. Similarly, when you were reading a poem or a short story or a play or a novel, you are reading an art form. And by critiquing that literary art form, that literary art, what is meant is that you need to be able to appreciate it, to judge it, to analyze it, to interpret it. You need to be able to identify the factors which have been certain emotions or feelings or thoughts in your mind. And critiquing also means your ability to judge which are the factors that have not been very effectively used. For example, if you see that a particular turn of phrase has not been properly effectively used, then you should be able to point out that that it has not worked. So my point is, sensibility is something which our students have. My experience of teaching in about 7 or 8 government colleges in West Bengal is that our students do not lack sensibility. But the problem is, whenever they have to express their sensibility, whenever they have to express their appreciation of a literary art, they cannot use the language properly, right? And my objective today will be to, hello, Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Loud and clear.
But I hear a lot of noise from that side. Yeah, okay. So, to be able to analyze, appreciate, or savor, or relish the way the literary artist has used the tools, you need language, because you need to be able to express your thoughts. If you feel, for example, that a poem has not been aesthetically satisfying, then you need to be able to have the language to establish your argument as to why this has not been aesthetically satisfying, why you claim that this poem does not appeal to you, or why you claim that this poem appeals to you. Which parts of the poem move you? Which parts of the poem do you find rather unpoetic? Now, the problem is, therefore, in other art forms, the medium is, for example, while sculpting something, whether sculpting an image or sculpting, statue, something like that. What are the tools? The tools are stone, the tools are clay, the tools are sand, if it is a sand sculpture. And when you are painting pictures, what are the tools? The tools are colors, mostly. And of course, there is an invisible tool, which is in the mind of the artist. That is his or her vision. But that is a different kind of tool, which not every individual is gifted with. But we, as ordinary human beings, we can at least try to identify, to detect how these tools have been used. Now, what is the tool for creating literature? The tool is only one, that is language. Okay, some of you might argue, well, silence is also a tool for producing certain literary effects. It's true. Silence is is a very effective tool, an effective tool. It has been used by, for example, Samuel Beckett to an extraordinarily wonderful effect, to evoke certain feelings, to point to certain philosophical aspects of human life, of human existence, just by using silence. But basically, before we hope that our students will be able to appreciate silence, the use of silence, the more basic thing to be concerned with, that our students should be enabled by us, by the teachers, to use language. Because if they do not have the language, number one, they will not be able to communicate with the text at all. They will not be able to see what happens in a particular poem or a particular short story. And at this point, let me point out one thing, one great error that we teachers mostly commit, and we transfer this error to our students. Whenever we ask our students to read a poem, what the students do is they seek a metaphorical meaning in it. They seek a symbolic meaning in it. But let me tell you that whenever you are reading a poem, the first thing you should remember is that you should get at the literal meaning of the piece, of the literary art. I mean, something happens when someone writes a poem or someone writes a short story, something happens in it. First, try to grasp what happens in it. Okay? And after you are able to understand what happens in a poem, or what happens in a play, or what happens in a novel, at the literal level, then you can direct your attention to the metaphorical levels, to the symbolic levels, and to any other kind of level that you can think of. But your basis for forming judgment about the metaphorical significance or symbolic significance of a particular text as a student who is also a lame critic, I would like to say, is to be able to communicate with the basic literal meaning, the surface meaning of the text first. And for that, you need to be able to learn the language. And what do you do? Particularly, I mean, the problem for us, for people like us who have not studied in any English medium school, we have come from a regional medium school, a vernacular medium school. And our problem is that we have not been exposed to the English language sufficiently. We do not have plenty of exposure. We find it difficult to grammatically relate one part of a sentence to another part. We find it difficult to judge which particular meaning of a given word is used in a particular context, because every word in any language has many different meanings. And it is the context which will tell you which particular meaning or which particular shade of the nuance of the semantic nuance of that word has been used in that given context. And this is really the problem for people like us who have come from Bengali medium school, from Hindi medium school, from regional medium schools. But even let me try to lessen your anxiety a little bit by pointing out certain truths. That even people, I mean the students who have come to study, who do come to study English literature from English medium schools, even they are not much ahead of you in this respect. Well, their vocabulary is stronger, right? But most of the time, believe me, it has been my experience as a teacher of English literature for over 3 decades that even people coming from, students coming from English medium schools are not very confident about the way they construct their sentences. I mean, for example, in your case, the major problem is the use of tense. In their case also, the major problem is the use of tense. In your case, you find it difficult to make your subjects agree with your verbs, and they also find it difficult to make their subjects agree with their verbs. Okay, so they are not much ahead. Only their vocabulary is stronger. In their reservoir, they have more words than we people have. So what is it that we have to do? And I have a 5-point program for people like us, for those who have just started to study English literature or who are thinking of studying English literature in future, and if they can, carry out these projects at the individual level, let me assure you that you people will not have to seek much external help. What the classroom teachers give you, what light they throw on a particular text will be enough for you. If only you have language to understand what your teacher says, and if you have language to communicate what you have understood. Now, what is that 5-point program? Look, there is something called register. Register is a language variety like dialect. For example, Bengali has many different dialects. You have the dialect of Murshidabad, which I used only a while ago. You have the dialect of Bankura, of Purulia, of Birbhum, of Hugli. In Hugli, for example, people do not say Khecho. They will ask you Kheocho. So these are all parts of the dialect. So dialect is a language variation according to the user. I mean the people of different regions. And register is a kind of language variety which is determined by the field of use. For example, if you are reading a book of physics, you will, and even if the book is written in English, you will certainly not find the same kind of English that you will come across, that you will see if you are reading a book written in English on some aspect of English literature. The language will vary, the register will vary, and you will have to capture, you will have to master, you will have to acquire the particular register of the English language, which is required for critiquing the literary art. And it is in this aspect that my 5-point program, if you can remember them well, you can take them down too, will help you to a great extent, because it has helped me a lot. And let me tell you that I'm one of the dullest persons in the world. All I have is a dogged tenacity, not to give up, but to pursue, to chase what I don't have until I acquire it, until I can claim that I have some working command over it. So if I can do it, anybody else in the world can do it. And here is the 5-point program. Look, what are the basic segments of language? The basic segments are phonology, morphology, and syntax. Phonology, as you know, deals with the sound system of a language. Now, about that, you need not bother, you need not worry right now, because you do not have to speak English when to the native speakers of the English language. So you don't have to worry much about sounds or intonation right at this level. Morphology deals with morphemes. Grossly speaking, morphemes are words, sometimes complete words, independent words, sometimes prefixes, sometimes suffixes, and all these things. Okay. And you need to have a very rich vocabulary in order to make passive communication with the literary text, that is, in order to be able to understand what is said there. For example, if you are reading a novel by Thomas Hardy, you know what kind of vocabulary. You need to be very strong about your syntax. That is, syntax is a subject which deals with the construction of sentences. And when you can acquire mastery over these 3 segments of English language, you can claim that you have acquired some mastery over the English language as a whole. Now, the solution is this. I mean, the 5-point program is this. This is what I feel will help you a lot. The first point that you should remember is not a day without a page. I keep telling my students every year, in every class when I meet them for the first time, that you must not spend a single day in your life unless you are lying down with fever in the bed. You must not spend a single day of your life without writing at least 1 page in English. And you write about anything. You can to begin with, you can write your day's diary, and then you can proceed to more complex topics. For example, you can try to write what your teachers said about a particular poem or about a particular novel, or how he or she introduced a particular play. I mean, whatever you heard, or if you find it difficult, even at the initial stage, if you find it difficult, you can do one thing. I mean, your thoughts, your brain is never empty. You can never free yourself from thoughts. your thoughts are constantly coming to your mind, and you just keep expressing your thoughts. So that is what I mean by not a day without a page. And what you should do is you must get your writing corrected by someone who knows English. And see, if you, I mean, that is very important, because if you keep on committing errors, linguistic errors, and if you keep on repeating them, then you will internalize those errors. And later on, it will be very difficult for you to get rid of those errors. So get your writing checked, corrected by your teacher. The second slogan of mine for the students is, again, the same thing, only the nature of the task is different. Not a day without a page. That is, you must not spend a single day of your life without reading at least one page from an English book. From an English book, not from a Bengali book or a Hindi book. And what sort of book you should read? I would prescribe some 5 or 6 authors whose books have helped me a lot in having a feel, in experiencing a feel of the English language. And those authors are Oscar Wilde, Somerset Maugham, George Orwell, Bernard Shaw, P.G. Wodehouse, Ruskin Bond, Bertrand Russell, Roald Dahl, and of course the Indian authors, other Indian authors. Ruskin Bond is also an Indian author. The other Indian authors are also there. For example, R.K. Narayan is there. He used to write wonderful English. And you read at least one page, and gradually you increase the number of pages that you read every day. And while reading, if you want to make the most of your reading, what you should do is you should maintain a diary. Write down the unfamiliar words, write down their meanings, write down their usages, write down the different shades of meaning that a particular word has, and how that word is used in many different contexts. Secondly, you will come across many different kinds of syntactic patterns, many different kinds of structures which you have never seen. And you should write that structure. If possible, you write the whole sentence, because it will be difficult at the initial stage for you to deduce the abstract structure. And therefore, I would suggest you write down the whole sentence, memorize it, and the principle behind the formation of that sentence will get automatically internalized in your brain, so that in future you will be able to form innumerable other sentences depending on that abstract principle of the syntactic pattern that is used while forming a particular sentence by a certain writer. The third thing that you should do is listening. You must listen to anything, any topic deliberated in English. And nowadays you have so many facilities, you have so many advantages. We did not have this advantage. We only had our radio set. But now you have your television, and there are many different kinds of programs which are conducted in English. You can listen to them, or you can simply go to your YouTube, and you very often visit YouTube for many different reasons. So why don't you choose a particular topic, and then you listen to it for 10 minutes. Okay. And the fourth thing that you should do is speaking. This is very, very important. Now, you may find it a bit odd that only a little while ago I asked you not to worry about speaking. No, what I told you, don't misunderstand me. What I told you, you don't have to worry about making your pronunciation of the English sounds and getting your English intonation correct or perfectly, because you are not going to communicate right now with the native speakers of the English language. But now what I mean by speaking is See, this should be a lifelong affair for people like us, those who I once again repeat, insist that those of us who are coming from Bengali medium school or regional medium schools, we should make learning English our lifelong project. And it is in this project that speaking plays a very vital role. How? Let me tell you. What I used to do when I was a student of class 7, I remember it very well. And I have been doing it even now. Right now, for example, I do not have any written material before you, but I'm talking to you. I don't know whether my materials are getting arranged properly or whether I'm just jumbling up everything. But I'm speaking English to you, and I have deliberately chosen not to keep things ready. Usually, when I speak, I don't keep things ready because I want to convert this opportunity into my private practice of speaking English, of translating myself. Yes, the point is, whenever you remember, let me tell you, you won't be able to remember this. I mean, what I'm going to tell you. You won't be able to remember this, to keep it in mind more than 10 times a day. But whenever you remember, you please translate the thoughts, the ideas, the emotions, and the feelings that are coming to your mind into English. For example, what is the feeling that is coming to your mind right now? Or what is the thought? Or what is the idea? Well, for example, the feelings, the feeling that is coming to my mind is, well, talking in this manner, when I can't see the faces and the frowns and the expressions of eyes and the movement of lips and the wrinkles on their faces of the people who are listening to me, is like feeling like a ghost, as if you were talking and you are not sure whether anybody is listening to you or not, because there is complete silence on the other side. If we had been in a live classroom situation, in a real life classroom situation, then I could have understood whether you are enjoying me or you are simply getting bored and you are waiting for the time when I will say, thank you, it's enough. Okay. Similarly, many thoughts are coming to your mind. I'm sure many ideas are coming to your mind. You please keep translating those thoughts and ideas and feelings into English language. Now, initially, you will find it a bit difficult, but then begin with short, simple sentences. For example, I'm talking to the students. For example, you can say, well, what is it called? Webinar. What is webinar? Webinar is some sort of a seminar. Why is it not called seminar? Because in a seminar, the talker, the speaker is visible, and the speaker is standing in front of a microphone, and before him there is an audience. And here everything happens in the virtual space. That may be one reason why this is called webinar. Now I'm just trying to translate your thoughts, the thoughts of the students. And some other student might be thinking of something else. For example, another thought might come to your mind, like, well, what is this fellow talking about? Is he talking about critiquing literary art? Now, we are not getting any literary art. We are not, getting any clues, any secrets as to how to critique literary art. He's not talking about studying literature. He's talking only about, how to learn English language. What shall we do with this? Oh, no, someone else will tell you. Some other self of your own body will tell you, no, he's right. If we do not have the language, how shall we read literature? And how shall we critique literary art? So he is talking about a more basic thing, and he is giving us certain suggestions, certain guidelines, by following which this fellow believes that we can master the English language, at least to a working extent, so that our students will not find it, our teachers will not find it difficult to communicate with us, and we will also not find it difficult to communicate with them. And the last thing, I told 5-point program, the last thing that I would like to tell you is, please teach whatever little English you know to some other people. For example, if you are reading in first year English honors or second year English honors or third year English honors, then you should try to teach how to use the English language to the people, to the students who are reading in class 11 or class 12 or class 9 or class 10. Well, I know it is very difficult because nobody will entrust you with the responsibility of teaching English to their words, to their sons and daughters, when you yourself do not know English very well. But then, let me tell you, you don't have to worry about money. We're not doing it for money. You just tell someone that, well, I'm not giving you private tuition. It's not that kind of thing. I'm not giving you private tuition. I'm just trying to see whether you are making some progress in your line, and let me see whether I can help you in your progress. And by doing that, let me see whether I can help myself in making some progress. And let us take this journey together. And then, just in the name of friendship, you will be able to teach something to that fellow. If you are reading, if you are doing your master's in English literature, for example, you can teach those students who are doing their honors. And you can, while teaching a particular text, you can teach them language. And I will give you one example why I put focus on learning English language so much as the most important factor, as the most important prerequisite for the students to be able to read literature and to critique literary art, is this. Okay, suppose, as I was telling you, if you have to read a novel by Thomas Hardy, have some of you tried to read The Return of the Native, or which is there in your syllabus, or Far from the Madding Crowd, or Tales of the D'Urbervilles, any of the novels? If you do, then you will find, let me tell you, if you are coming from the regional medium schools, you will find yourself in great trouble, because you will not be able to understand most of the sentences, how they are constructed, nor will you be able to understand the meanings of many of the words. And let me tell you, the meaning of the words alone will not give you the meaning of a sentence. You need to be able to follow the pattern in which that particular sentence is constructed. And if you can do that, you will be able, I'm sure, to acquire that sensibility which you all need in order to be able to read literature and to critique literary art. I will give you just a few examples. Think of Philip Sidney's sonnet, Astrophel and Stella, sonnet number 1. I'm sure you have read it. I mean, those who are studying English honors, you all have read it, haven't you? I'll just read the first few lines, okay? Loving in truth and fain in verse my love to show, that she, dear she, might take some pleasure of my pain, pleasure might cause her read, reading might make her know, knowledge might pity win, and pity grace obtain, I sought fit words to paint the blackest face of woe. Now, if I ask you, right in the first class, to give me the meaning of these 5 lines, yes, 5 lines, I'm sure without the help of your teacher, you won't be able to make head or tail of it. Because the first thing that you have to do is Are Baba, where does it begin? Loving in truth is not a finite sentence. And in verse, my love to show is not a finite sentence. So the first thing you have to do while reading a poem is to meet a finite sentence first. And from that finite sentence, you can relate the other infinite sentences as parts of that major sentence. For example, here, I sought fit words. And then you begin to ask questions. Sought is the past tense form of seek. So I sought fit words. Fit means appropriate. Now, why did the speaker seek appropriate words? The answer is this: to paint the blackest face of woe. That is, he wanted to paint, woe means sorrow, to paint the gloomiest picture of sorrow. Why? Ask the next question. Why? Because he loved someone in truth. He loved someone genuinely, loving in truth. And feigning verse my love to show. And he would be glad if he could express his love for that person by writing some verses. That she, dear she, might take some pleasure of my pain, so that she would derive some pleasure from the expression of his pain. Now, that is a different issue. I mean, nobody derives pleasure out of anybody else's pain. We derive pleasure from that kind of pain which has found an aesthetic expression. That is, pain in life is painful. But when you find the same pain expressed in a poem, in literature, you find it pleasurable. It is that kind of pleasure which is intended to be meant. And pleasure, if you get pleasure, then you will read more of it. And if you read more of it, then, if that person reads more of his verses, then that person whom the speaker loves would be able to know what feelings are reserved for her in his mind. And this knowledge would lead that person to pity the speaker. Riders to the sea, haven't you? Riders to the sea. You know that the central character in that who lives in Aran Island, and she has already lost her husband in the sea. The sea is dangerous there. She has 2 daughters, Catherine and Nora. They are left back at home. Moria has lost her husband and her 4 sons, all of whom were very strong and sturdy and young. And she has lost them to the sea, in the sea. They have all drowned in the sea because the sea is turbulent in the Aran Islands. And when the play opens, we find that Michael is missing. Michael has not, 9 days have passed and Michael has not come back home. And Bartley decides to go down to the sea because he will have to go to the Galway Fair. And although Moria insists that he should not go, and both Kathleen and Nora, the 2 sisters, they also joined their mother and forbid Bartley from undertaking the journey. Bartley has to go because if he does not go to the Galway Fair, then sisters will die of starvation. And then there is the other side of the danger. If he goes down to the sea, there is every possibility that he too will drown in the sea like his brothers. And then, meanwhile, Nora has got a bundle of clothes from the young priest. He is an absentee character. He never appears in the play. He is talked about on 4 occasions in the play. And that he has given a bundle of clothes to Nora. And Nora is waiting. Nora and Catherine are waiting, belong to Michael. But they cannot do it in front of Moria. They will do it when Moria leaves. And Moria has to leave because Bartley was in a hurry when he left and he forgot to take his cake. And Moria also said some bad words on the eve of his departure. And Moria, therefore, needs to say some good words to give blessings so that the bad words uttered by her can be counteracted. Now, after Moria leaves, Nora and Kathleen open the bundle of clothes and they tally one item after another with what Michael used, and they finally come to the conclusion that the clothes do belong to Michael, which means that Michael has got a clean burial. Michael too has drowned in the sea, and there was nobody to bury his dead body. This is all. This is the background. Now, after Nora and Kathleen come to the conclusion that the clothes belong to Michael, they burst into lamentation. And I will quote something which I will never forget in my life. I have not yet forgotten. I have not written it down anywhere because I'm confident that even if I die of corona, I will remember those lines, those words spoken by Nora, lamenting Michael's death by drowning. Nora says, "Isn't it a pitiful thing that there's nothing left of a man who was a great rower and fisher, but a bit of an old shirt and a plain stocking?" Now, you see, this is a lamentation not only of Nora mourning the death of her brother. It is the lamentation of all humanity. We are all considered to be great heroes, and yet when we perish, this is the language in which our near and dear ones lament our death. Isn't it a pitiful thing? I mean, death reduces all our heroic endeavors, all our achievements, all our attainments, all our monographs and awards and whatever we have achieved in this life in material terms or in some other terms will be reduced to nothing, to a pitiful show by death. And the truth which is inescapable. So by lamenting the death of Moria, Nora represents the entire mankind, just as Moria represents entire mankind at the end of the play when she says, no man at all can be living forever and we must be satisfied. I will give you another example. This is a wonderful thing. This is from a poem by Yeats. You know, you will. I'm sure after I quote that poem. It's a short poem. He wishes the cloths of heaven. That is the title of the poem. It's a love poem. And at the end of the poem, the lover addresses his beloved directly and says these two lines. Listen to me very carefully and ask me to repeat if you can't hear me properly. I call your feet. Tread softly. Tread means walk. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly. Because you tread upon my dreams, right? So I'm sure that many of you will remember the love poems written in other languages, and I find this is most appealing. This is the most appealing prayer of a surrender of a lover. To understand this, you need to know that tread means walk. Okay? And you also need to be able to identify the structure of that sentence softly, because you tread upon my dreams. I will give you another example. Now, this time from the novel is A Passage to India, which either you have read or you will read at the postgraduate level. Now, with the theme of relationship between two nations, between two races, particularly when one of these two races is colonized and the other the colonizer. What E.M. Foster shows through this novel, there are three sections in the novel. The first section is called the mosque, the second is called the caves, the third is called the temple. In the first section, it is shown, don't ask me how, it is shown that perhaps it is possible for the Britons and the Indians to establish some sort of a relationship of friendship. But then in the next section, in the caves, this possibility is nullified. Adela Quested is by Dr. Aziz to visit the Marawa caves, and inside one of the caves something happens. Adela Quested complains that Dr. Aziz tried to molest her, which is not true. A charge which she also withdraws finally. And then in this section it is shown that no, it is not possible for the master and the subject to form an abiding relationship. And then in the next section, in the temple, this possibility is aroused. This possibility is defined. Where they all drown in the waters of the Mao Tang. suggesting that it is possible for the two nations to form some kind of a merger, to blend inextricably. And at the end, this is my point, towards the end, in the section, the temple, it is said that Dr. Aziz and Cyril Fielding, they are riding on two different horses. And then one of them says, they were talking about friendship. And one of them says, well, why can't we be friends now? That is, most probably Cyril Fielding asked this to Dr. Aziz. Why can't we be friends now? It's what you want. It's what I want. Then there is a full stop. The paragraph changes. And the new paragraph begins thus. But the horses didn't want it. They swerved apart, sending up rocks through which the riders must pass single file. The jail, the tank, the stone, the trees, the birds, everything under the sky said, no, not now. And the sky said, no, not there. This is how the novel ends. Now you just see, I was talking about the power of silence. When the question is asked, why can't we be friends now? It's what you want, it's what I want. Then there is a full stop. Paragraph changes. In between the two paragraphs, something happens in order to be able to appreciate which, to critique which, we need to have and this sensibility, I believe, is shaped and molded and nourished to a great language. Okay, so it is 25 minutes past 4. It's almost 1.5 hours that I have been talking for, and I'm sure that you must have grown tired by now. I will just end my talk expressing my gratitude to Krishnagar Govt College, which has given me the opportunity to go back, even though mentally. I worked there for 6 long years, and I loved the college. I loved the building. I loved the students. I loved the large playground before the, I don't know if it is called Gothic structure of the building. Okay, and I'm not sure whether that field is still so large as it was. I love the trees around the principal's bungalow, and I loved everything about Krishnagar, including what are they? The special two special sweets are shor bhaja and shor puriya. Okay, I liked them. I liked everything. I enjoyed my stay there, and I was very young at that time, and I'm really grateful to my student, Professor Pulokesh Ghosh, to Shobhan Niyogi, officer in charge of the college, to professors of opportunity to share some moments of joy and pleasure with my students and with all of you. Thank you very much. Now I'm waiting for the questions. In fact, I like to be asked most challenging questions, so that I also have the opportunity to learn something while trying to do some kind of brainstorming and to try and answer those questions in a convincing manner. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnagar Government College. Shuman Banerjee, would like to thank you for your enthralling lecture. The lucidity with which you approached the vast area covered by the title of the webinar and the confidence that you tried to instill in the minds of the young listeners through your humble yet profound lecture deserve commendation and ensure the success of this webinar.
Oh,
Nonetheless, I assume
I'm grateful to you. I'm really grateful to you.
that, thank you, sir. The pleasure is all
All your
ours,
kind
actually.
words.
UG and PG students are brimming with
Yeah,
observations and questions. And
Of course.
I think they have already started placing their questions in the chat box. So I'll read out
Okay.
the first question that is there. And it
Yeah.
actually comes from one of the faculty
Okay.
members of history.
Okay.
And I quote, as he says,
Okay.
I find most of the
Sure.
students show less interest in reading books which are written in English.
Yeah.
Could you, sir, please suggest
Yeah.
any tricks to make them interested in reading books written in English? That's the question, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. This is a very, very, very pertinent question. I won't say it's a very profound question, but I like these types of questions. Acha, can you stop the noise, please? Yeah. Somebody is speaking, and I can hear the noise. Okay. Tanmoy Babu, thank you so much for raising a very pertinent question. Well, students nowadays have really begun to show an apathy towards reading, even in the whole society. There is a large-scale apathy towards reading. The reason, the reason is the capitalist ethos, because we have cheap pleasure, and if you have to do something difficult in order to derive pleasure out of that, you will certainly not prefer going the difficult way, but to choose the easy path. Okay, that was the cause. But then your question is, can you suggest some ways as to how to get them interested? I have thought of this. I thought of this. If you had talked about the students of English literature, then I had a pet answer. But when we're talking about the students of history honors, yeah, and it's true. Whatever subject you read, whatever subject you have taken up as your discipline for future studies, reading literature is a must. You cannot claim to be a human being proper without reading literature, without reading stories. Poems are not for all, I admit. Okay, but stories, short stories, novels, novellas, plays, these things can be read by everybody. Now, what I would suggest is ask them to begin the process of reading novels which are written in a simple language. For example, right now I can tell you, ask your students to read one novel by Saint-Exupéry. He's a French author. Saint-Exupéry. Title of that novel is The Little Prince. It's a very short book, about 100 pages long. And let me tell you, Tanmoy Babu, that if your students do not become grateful to you for asking them to read that book, then I do everything, that's all my understanding of human psychology. So you can ask them, it will change their vision of life. There are some of them to read Mitch Albom's book, Tuesdays with Maury. Okay, so you have to, Tanmay Babu, you have to choose your books which this was suggesting to your students to read are written in a language which is easily accessible to them. If they find the language difficult, they are not going to read it. So give them incentive by exposing them to a kind of very profound text, philosophically, psychologically profound text, written in a language which is extremely simple. And then after finishing The Little Prince, they will come to you and will ask you, sir, suggest another book. That was wonderful. And we shall be grateful to you forever. If you had not told us, we would never have come to know that book. And we shall forever remain grateful to you for suggesting that we should go read that book. Tanmay Babu, have I been able to address your question to some extent?
I'm sure you have
Okay,
done that,
okay.
sir.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
we'll obviously look for his comments in the chat box. But
I got
we are
it,
going to move forward to the second and the third questions. I'm going to punch the two questions because they are from the same
Right.
person. And they are both
Okay.
addressed to Dr. Gupta, the first speaker, the first distinguished speaker of our webinar today. These questions come from a listener called Imran Sheikh, who has asked. And the first question, ma'am, if you are listening,
Yes,
how
I'm here.
does literary criticism, thank you, ma'am, how does literary criticism differ from opinion? And the second question that the same person has asked is, how would you define or limit explication in the context of literary criticism?
Okay. To address the first question first, thank you so much for putting up the question. Well, literary criticism is a technical job which needs evaluations and evidences. So one critic cannot just give away the opinion and leave this space. It has to be with the evidences that one needs to validate the opinion. Opinion, in other way, is a very general comment, and you can have a biased opinion as well, but a critic's job is opinion. This is the major difference. Coming to the second question, the explication. Well, this became a literary text or the technical term with new criticism. You know, a critic's job is a very difficult job, because to evaluate a whole writing is one thing. But suppose one piece of writing is given to someone to evaluate. So the critic has to go to the close reading, a very attentive reading. There the critic doesn't know the context, the critic doesn't want to bring in the author, but it cannot be the summary also. So someone who is not to summarize
We just bind the stereotypes.
Fair enough. First of all, the qualities of a critic. We cannot just number the qualities. A person might have some intricate qualities to become a critic. As I started my lecture with, every critic is a critic. only is the quality of criticism. Exposure means learning, and learning means both types of learning. The learning with the good literature and learning with the not so established literature. Then only we would have the ability to come to sieve out to the qualities of a good literature. So a critic essentially must be very well exposed to different environments, to different learnings, readings, and must be able to reflect upon the analysis. So analyzing is very important. Technically, the judgment and unbiased opinion making or formation is very important. But more than that, a critic has to nuances from the author and then would judge that how it is received by the reader as well. So critic is not only evaluating the text, it is also evaluating the impact. It also evaluates the function of the society's things. That is how we judge which all period is reacting to it. Text would be carried. We carry the text, not the author. It's very author is great. Actually, no author is great. The texts are great. So the critic should be able to differentiate between the qualities of the text that is written by the author. There are many other things. What I can say is the critic should be able to receive impression. It must have the good communication qualities, because even if someone is very sensitive, very receptive, very intelligent, quite analysis are not up to the mark. So maybe a wrong usage of word, a wrong usage of tone or nuance or genre, it might just kill. As I gave few examples, that even the greatest critics they blunder, they judge or misjudge people. So has to be very good in communication, because then it would be a very transient evaluation of a book. It won't go long, and like the text, the critic would also be quoted in future, because it goes hand in hand. A critic is the person who is establishing who is validating the text, who is establishing the worth of the text. Now that critic is the reader, of course, is the general reader, but more than the reader, one who is receiving the meanings, the layers of meanings, and then establishing the larger meaning of the text is the true critic. So one should be very much able to communicate, to receive and to expose the text, and then to establish. So a critic should go hand in hand with the text, keeping the author in mind. The critic should be able to judge the limitations and the talent of the author. If the critic fails to understand the limitations, expectations are too large, and then the good prominent qualities we can say. The second question, sorry, I forgot. Should I go to the chat box? Something about Tagore. What was that? Okay, I could find here. A common rickshaw puller can come up with something of a rare kind of. Oh, of course, why not? You see whole of our Bhakti Andolan, who went to the universities. Each poet whom we consider as very great poets of India, each one is a non-goer to the school. They never went to the school. In fact, I'm really happy the way Professor Shishir Kumar Chatterjee got exposed to the native speaker. So why go on with the biases? Don't be loaded with the trained capabilities. There is no need to have the trained capabilities to become a good critic. If you can understand that particular rustic, the rustic tone of the basic writing, because author himself or herself would not have been a very big scholar. The author is driven by the passion, and that passion is reflected in the writing. So naturally, as a person who is sitting in a big university department, we have to connect that is the basic thing, and that is how the popularity is just basically why a book becomes a seller. If critics are the only would maximum number of critics, functional critics. So a functional critic is definitely that rickshaw puller who finds the anand, the pleasure, the serene, the pristine, harmony in the mind. So definitely there is no, no capping of qualifications to become a critic. Anyone can become a critic. It's a very good question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for the patience you have shown in answering all the questions. Could we move on to the next question? And I think it is addressed to Dr. Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm there.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So the next question, it is also by the same person, Aditi, who has asked you, can language and literature be kept apart? Especially, is it not possible to have the truest feeling after reading a literary text without bothering about language?
Is she a student? Aditi is a student, right?
I'm not sure. I think so, but I cannot see the picture, so I'm not sure because it's a common name.
Aditi is a student.
Okay. Yeah.
Aditi, I mean, so far as I have understood, your question is this. Let me rephrase it. Can we separate language from literature or literature from language? The question is not written in language, because you can write poetry on air, you can write poetry on the sun, but the sun cannot write poetry. But the air cannot write poetry. The mountains cannot write poetry. It is only the human beings who can write poetry. The dogs and the cattle can do something which is poetic. For example, soon after giving birth to its calf, when the cow cleanses the body of little creature, of that nascent creature, that is poetic. That is poetry, to write poetry on it. So you cannot separate language from literature. But what I believe is, this is not what you wanted to know. This is what everyone knows. What you perhaps wanted to know, as I can guess, I mean, this is what I try to do. I mean, not bothering about the language. Maybe what you mean by not bothering about the language is not bothering about the technicalities. For example, when you are reading a poem, you may not bother about the rhyme scheme. we fail to perceive the greatness of life. Again, for example, if you imagery, for example, is a technicality. Now, how can you afford to appreciate a poem by not bothering about the imagery used in it? Okay. For example, let me give just 2 lines. Dragged are squandered in the fireplace. Now, Aditi, if you do not put focus on the men folk, I mean the male members of the society take a lot of trouble in carrying wood. Even the women folk do, that's true. How they take a lot of trouble in cutting the firewood and carrying it up by tying it into a bundle, tying that bundle onto their back. And they cross a long, they cover a long path to back to the. But if such, unless you are aware, which is associated with using money wastefully, then this nuance of the squander, you will miss much of the impact of the line, and you will simply in the at the literal level. The literal is important, but then you will have to the only this. You will have to jump higher, okay? And so realities which will help you to higher and higher, okay? Did you got an answer? Oh, very well said. That is what Aditi Mondal says. Thank you, Aditi. Thank you, Aditi.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I would take the opportunity to express my gratitude to both our district speakers for the kind of patience they have shown in answering each and every question. And I think now it's time when I don't have any more questions, do we? Probably not.
Just
So
one
I think
sec.
it's time that we can pass over
Someone has asked
for
for
the vote
some
of
book,
thanks to
wants
our.
to
Yes, ma'am.
learn criticism more than the books if they are necessarily the cartoonists, famous cartoonists of India, maybe Dhar, R.K. Lakshman, Pillai.
Srimati Sudeshna Mukherjee. Sudeshna, are you there?
But she's not.
Hello, Shimon, am I audible?
Yeah, you are
Yeah, you are
audible. So Sudeshna, it's over to you, I think.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
So we have come almost to the end of the webinar. And on behalf of the Department of English, Krishnagar Government College, I extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Shishi Chatterjee and Dr. Nirja A. Gupta for gracing the occasion this afternoon, and enlightening our minds. Dr. Gupta engaged with the concept of the critic and opened the new vista in front of our eyes. And the role of the critic is something that we grapple with every time we are in classroom, because we have to be critics and teachers at the same time. So this was a kind of refreshing of our memory. And Dr. Chatterjee, he reminded us of the intricate relation between literature and language. And this is something very vital in teaching literature, as I have found as a teacher, because students often have misconceptions in this area. So I think the students will benefit very greatly from the way Dr. Chatterjee explained this. So thank you, professors, for your lovely talks. It was a great pleasure listening to you, and not only a pleasure, it was a very, very enriching experience.
Oh, thank you so much.
Next, thank you, sir. Next, I would also like to thank Dr. Shobhan Yogi, Officer in Charge, Krishnagar Government College, for his inspiration and untiring guidance. Also to Dr. Amoresh Mandal, Coordinator, IQAC, Krishnagar Government College, for his unfailing help and support. I would also like to thank excellent audience and has made today's webinar great. Thank you everyone.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, can we leave?
I suppose so, sir. The webinar has, I think, officially come to an end.
So can we leave now?
Lokesh, sir, are you there?
Yes, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, goodbye. Stay safe and stay well.
Same